Thank you for joining Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracey.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. Before we get started, real quick, if you could, like, subscribe, rate, wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening. Helps us do a lot more cool stuff on the podcast, kind of like the cool stuff we're doing today, which we'll get into in a minute. But with that, I was out a couple weeks ago with the flu. Charles was out last week at F3. Now we're both back, and so is our producer, Josh Haynes.
What's going on, gentlemen? It is so exciting to see both of you together finally on an episode. What are we talking about today on this new episode of Cents Per Mile?
Brokers.
Okay.
So basically, CDLLife surveyed their audience and made a post that said, if you could ask anything from a broker and they had to answer, what question would you ask? And the basically the app community left a lot of questions. So we then found Paul from FreightCaviar, who was willing to come on and has spent time as a broker to answer the audience questions.
Thanks for having me.
We're excited to talk to you today. Our topic is brokers, and who better than yourself to talk and weigh in on this topic with myself and Paul. So welcome to the show, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. When I saw the LinkedIn post, I immediately thought it'd be great to talk about the broker world since I worked as a broker for it was over 6 years. I was a freight broker, and then afterwards I started FreightCaviar. FreightCaviar is basically a freight broker media site where we bring entertainment, humor, and news and education into the freight broker world. So I spend my days talking to freight brokers all across the country and getting a good idea of what's going on in the market and what to look out for.
Nice. Sounds like some exciting stuff, and it sounds like you come from a well-versed background on this topic. So thank you for taking some time out to talk to myself and Paul.
Definitely. I'm very excited.
Cool. So kind of like we talked about, we did take the CDLLife audience, and on their app, we asked them if they could ask a broker anything, and the broker had to answer, what would you ask that broker? And I have a list of questions, and we can blast through those real fast and then talk about some more stuff, if you're cool with that.
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So Rich Witzel said, can I have your personal phone number so I can call you at 2 a.m.?
My personal phone number. Well, I have my phone number on sleep mode, so I don't even hear it, even if you do call at 2 a.m. And honestly, even when I was a freight broker, I had it on sleep mode because you end up working for 10 hours, stressed out, and you come home and the number one thing, and I guess the most important thing for sleep or for mental health is sleep. So I would always get my 7 to 8 hours of sleep.
But then my question is, drivers get stuck on their 10, but they still get calls from brokers on their 10. How does that work?
Sure. I think what we're really looking at in the industry right now is the industry wants to have more visibility with less calls, where you could essentially have the driver tracking on an application without him having to do anything with his phone. Therefore, I think the industry is headed towards a better, it's going to be better for the drivers overall, as long as they accept the track. It's obviously difficult for the driver to, I guess, sometimes understand the reasoning behind it, but it's mostly the shippers, the customers of the brokers that demand such tracking. Maybe not like the 2 a.m. tracking updates, but it depends on how hot the shipment is. But the brokers tend to do what the customer and the shipper want them to do. But we see a lot of freight tech headed into just having real-time visibility without having to bother the driver. So I think the drivers should be welcoming the new freight tech that's coming into the industry and trying to get all the apps on their phone so that they don't get bothered at 2 a.m.
All right. Next one. Tiny Trucker said, why are you afraid to put all the information on the loads you post, primarily your cut of the revenue?
So there's a lot of competition in the freight brokerage world. It's actually kind of crazy. Each year there's a lot more freight brokers, and specifically with the last hot market between the pandemic and I guess the beginning of this year, when you're dealing with a lot of competition, what I was taught was, at least, and what I've experienced was that when you post all the information on the load, there are going to be brokers looking at these postings, and they're going to be sending screenshots to your customer saying that load isn't covered. Can I have that load? I could cover it for either cheaper, or I could have a truck in there faster. That's one reason. A second reason is that customers and shippers actually look at DET postings. Therefore, when they see a posting of their load on DET or whatever truck board it is, they know that their load is not covered, and that's an issue. I've had customers send me screenshots of my postings saying you obviously don't have the load covered. I'm taking the load away from you. So at the end of the day, the broker does everything they could to ensure they have the load and it doesn't get taken away from them. And they don't want other brokers seeing that what they're posting the rates for and the information, because it's all very competitive. So I guess there's just a bunch of competition. It's really bad competition in the sense that there's a lot of brokers out there nowadays, and they're each fighting for the same customer.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, but then there's got to be a standard cut that someone comes away with, or something that can be transparently available to the drivers and the carriers.
The standard cut, though, when you look at the average all around the industry on a yearly average, and you can see these at the publicly traded companies, they all have to provide their financials each quarter. So on average, a broker is making 15%. Of course, there's times where brokers will lose money, or they will make a couple percent margins, and there's times where they'll make more percent margins. But when you look at the average, it's usually right around 15%. And 15% is not a lot when you consider all the operations and cash flow that goes into ensuring such an operation, especially since a lot of the large enterprise shippers, they take 90 to 120 days to pay, whereas the broker has to pay within 30 days, which leaves essentially 60 to 90 days of, like, I guess, a lag between the payment. So brokers are almost operating as banks, and so for the shippers. So it's really, if you look at the average, it's right at 15%. And yes, sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but overall, that's what you got to make to make sure everyone's getting paid. And you're only going to be making a lot of money at high volumes, and to get a high volume, you need to have a lot of cash flow, able to cash flow the whole operation.
All right. The next three questions are written very much. They're all the same question, but they're written differently. So John Waz said, "Why do you freaking lie all the time?" The next one is Chris Part-Time Nako said, "Why do you lie about everything?" And Harold L. Muniz said, "Why do you lie so much?"
So, lying, yeah. When you look at the industry, there's definitely a lot of liars, and I guess lying is just to ensure that what it sucks is that when you're dealing over the phone and via email, it's easy to lie. And I think that it's something that everyone wants to essentially just make sure that the load is covered, there's no problems, and then somehow like fidget their way through it. I mean, I've seen people lie, and I think that it's mostly just because we're sitting behind a desk and a phone. That's probably the number one reason. If I were to give any advice to people, to truckers and dispatchers that are listening, is that you really want to find a few people in the industry that you could build really good relationships with, and that means that you work with them on a consistent basis. You have an honest, long-term relationship with them, instead of trying to find, if you're looking for brokers that will lie, you could find one every day on the load board. But if you're looking for an honest relationship, it's best to just, if you find a good broker, stay in contact with them and try to work with them as much as possible, because it's difficult in the industry, especially since it's, like I said earlier, it's so competitive. People are just lying to making sure that their ass is covered, making sure that their customers is served. So yeah, it's definitely it's a really big issue in the industry, but I don't see any other way to counter it besides trying to find a good few people to work with on a regular basis.
So a bonus question on the back of that, let's say that I'm an owner-operator, right? And I am trying to build a long-term, honest relationship with a broker. How do I know the person that I finally sit down to try and build a relationship with is honest?
Well, in any relationship, it takes time, and time will during that time period, you will see if they're honest about the load. If, let's say you do one load together, everything goes smoothly, everything's honest, everyone's on time. So that's one way to definitely know that, like, if you've done 5 loads and everything's been great, then you have a track record, and that goes for any relationship you have outside of the industry. There's usually a track record, which holds someone true to their word. So if you book one load and all of a sudden you realize that you've been lied at, I would just automatically avoid that person. A second thing is definitely look at Google reviews. Google reviews say a lot about a freight brokerage, and a lot of freight brokers have terrible Google reviews. It's actually kind of crazy. If you Google a lot of freight brokerages, they have very low reviews. So I think definitely doing a mix.
Is that crazy though, Paul?
I think it's crazy in the sense of now, like, I get why they have low reviews. It's kind of crazy because overall, like, that's something that you'd think wouldn't be such a big issue nowadays. So you'd be like, well, you have the internet, so you could expose any company that mistreats you. But it's like when like 80% of the industry mistreats you, then it's like it's just a norm. And I kind of find it crazy from that point where it's like you don't have like if you go Google a restaurant, 80% of those restaurants probably have really good reviews, otherwise they wouldn't be in business. But if you Google a freight brokerage, 80% of them have terrible reviews, and yes, they're usually the more bad reviews they have, that means the more business and money they're making. So it's crazy because you can't really, I don't think there's any industry where you could literally have so many bad reviews, and like the more bad reviews you have, the more money you make. Like that's like what mind boggles me.
I can see those two going hand in hand because, I had a couple times like I'd get a load. Oh, no touch freight. Get there. There's no dock. Find out I'm hauling a load of refrigerators and that there's no dock, there's no lift, and that I'm supposed to somehow get them off the back of this 53-foot trailer, drop them on the ground, get them in their front door, and then lined up in their stock room. So I can imagine where the bad reviews come from. I also imagine that with being a broker on top of it, you're going to get more bad reviews because the more money you make, the less money the driver's making and the carrier that they're shipping that with. So, I mean, I definitely see that going more hand in hand than people want to give it credit for.
Sure. And, with this competitive market right now, it's actually crazy because, well, there's so many brokers in the market. There's only so many shippers, and everyone's fighting for those loads, and every broker is undercutting themselves. So, like, I would say, to be honest, like the ones that actually, the brokers that are huge enterprise brokerages, they just make money on the volume of loads they sell, but they're not making that much per load, which is actually kind of like the shocking thing. So like a lot of these brokers nowadays, they're making a lot less per load because the customer's not paying that much. There's too much competition in that market. So they're not even making that much. They're just quoting it very low, and then they have to make sure that they're making some kind of money on it since they're operating a business and they can't be operating on losses. So it's just obviously it's a bad time in the current market.
So on a side note on that one, I guess my question would be is if I'm a new fleet owner or owner operator and I'm looking to build that relationship, what's a couple ways I could find a broker that outside of just the load boards to make that friendship with and show that consistency with in business so we could build that relationship?
I would definitely visit personally. I think any relationship benefits from a physical visit in person. So if you're based out of whatever city you're based out of, there's definitely a freight brokerage. Most likely, if you're in a metropolitan area, within a few, maybe 20, 30 miles within where you're based from, I would just go and directly try to build a relationship with them in person, see how you could potentially link up and work together. That's one. I think consistent communication, calling, contacting, as many contact points as you can think of, the stronger the relationship will be. If you meet in person, you grab coffee, and then you talk on the phone the next day, and then you email, and then you have those points of contact. Just like any relationship in sales, you're going to benefit along the line. And it's also like you might, meet someone in person, and then let's say like you don't hear back for 2 months or something's linking up, and then all of a sudden they have a new customer, and they're like, oh, this person's perfect for it because 2 months ago when we grabbed coffee, he was telling me he runs this lane, and then all of a sudden you might have a consistent lane. So I think the benefits of it are long term, and it definitely requires patience. It won't come out of nowhere. But as long as you work at those relationships and you find ways to meet in person or even calling them on a regular basis, I had a lot of relationships where I just via phone would contact them, and we would have a good time. We talked about other stuff than trucking, and we talked about sports. We talked about what else is going on in each other's lives, and I think that's very important. And I think although freight brokers for the most part could seem as bad people, most of them are pretty normal, and they're all at the end of the day wanting to build a relationship with the trucking company.
Nice. Well, speaking of relationships, I got a comment from Jason Gordon. It looks like he's trying to build a relationship with the broker that owes him some detention. He actually said, "Did you actually pay my detention for the last 5 hours, or is your company telling me that you didn't and keeping it?"
So detention is also another topic where it does, depends on the customer and the shipper. Some shippers and customers are easy to approve detention. They'll easily pay it. At the end of the day, what I could stress to any driver is to accept tracking via phone, because if you have your dispatcher tracking your truck and you could show proof, because this is the most important thing that shippers will ask is do you have proof of this detention, especially a large shipper. Small shippers, for the most part, they don't need that just because they'll have the in and out time signed. But if you could provide tracking of your truck at a location, especially specific to a dock on that location tracker, it's so beneficial and a lot easier to get detention approved. Because getting detention from some customers is you're literally fighting, or it's like you're arguing with them for that detention. And if you show proof, then it just increases your argument and increases your likelihood, and for the most part they'll prove it because they see the tracking. So I would say that for the most part, from my experience, whenever the shipper paid me, I paid the truck driver for sure. I've had the drivers wait longer, but if they showed me proof, it was also easier just to send them an updated rate count, because that means I could fight it out of the customer later. So that's the one thing I would say about tracking or detention, is to make sure you have your live tracking, you have a tracking screenshot, and you have proof that you were there for that detention.
All right. The next question is from Darth Spader. This is kind of a fun one. He said, "What do you do with my money?" But then Jason Shoup, who is actually a broker who is on the app, replied with cocaine and hookers. Can you confirm that is where the money goes?
What do I do with the driver's money? Well, can I confirm? Well, I definitely don't do cocaine, or I don't go to the strip club, so I can't confirm that. For maybe Jason does that, but so I guess when you say what do I do with the driver's money, what does that mean? In the sense the money that I make from the load?
I think they were implying what you do with your cut.
With my cut?
But they were implying that your cut is their money.
Okay. Well, I just live a regular life. I don't know. I don't have anything too fancy. I feel like I'm a pretty normal person. I sometimes go on vacation. What else? I have to pay rent. It's overall, it's not that crazy of a lifestyle. The brokers that I know that make a lot are also working a lot. And I also, if anyone, I always say this, and if anyone thinks that freight brokerage is an easy way to make money, I invite that person to open a freight brokerage. Because if it's really that easy, then they could make money easily, but it's usually not that way around. So I guess that's all I can say.
I've seen them popping up like weeds though lately. It seems like everyone's trying to be a freight broker right now.
But that does kind of lead into the next question. Bob from NC said, why do you have a job still? In the days of smartphone and internet, why are there still brokers?
So shippers like to use brokers because at the end of the day, okay, so the shipper is paying around a 15% margin, and they don't have to deal with all of their logistical problems. And broker does, they really do a lot for that 15% cut. And if you were look at a shipper, so a shipper, let's just say they have 50 loads a day. If they have 50 loads a day, if they wanted to get their own trucks into that door without using a broker, they might actually realistically have to use call it trucking companies to get them, physical trucks in that door. Or they could go to one, maybe two, maybe three brokerages, and they have that all covered. So it's really just, it simplifies the supply chain for a shipper. So that's the reason why freight brokerages exist today. And that's actually the reason why they won't cease to exist. It's because it's just 100 times easier to have one broker or a couple brokers do all that work for you than you physically having to do it. Plus, on top of that, shippers could pay brokers 60 to 120 days, and there's so many freight brokers out there that they'll usually all accept those pay terms, whereas brokers have to pay within 30 days. So there's a lot of things that a freight broker does that just simplifies, I guess, the life of a shipper. So that's the reason why they exist, and that's why they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, your point seems solid on that, and I think as a driver, I'd have to question because where it simplifies for the shipper, it definitely didn't simplify things for me as a driver. I mean, I've been out of the truck, Paul, let me tell you, for a little bit now, and I still get brokers calling me for load updates. How? I'm not attached to nothing. What database are they pulling my information from to call? I think that there's a lot of questions to be asked on the driver's side, which brings me from H-Town D, who put, is there any way to see how much the load is really paying? And then a follow-up came from Lady Tex, which was, what's the real payout for this load?
It's difficult to be transparent in the space. And I know a lot of drivers want to have transparency, but at the end of the day, like, you're operating a business, and it's difficult. There's actually a great post from Adam Wingfield, who's a consultant in trucking. He used to be a truck driver, about why he doesn't agree with transparency in the logistics space. And I could send you that link after we get off the call. I think he kind of explains it pretty well. But overall, if someone has a customer, they work tremendously hard to get that customer. It's not easy to get a shipper to be your customer, especially in this day and age. It's extremely difficult. And whatever you quote, so some shipper might have a freight broker that they absolutely love the service. They absolutely, they've been together for 10 years or so. And so, like, that person, whatever rate that person has, technically, like, especially in this capitalistic supply and demand environment we live in, it makes it's something that you can't really take away from that person. And creating transparency will take away from the capitalism side of things, where it's like, you could decline that load if you don't want it, but here's the supply and demand. Like, whatever my rate I got from the customer, that's something I worked for potentially years and cultivated that relationship. So, like, that's my cut because I've been in contact with this person. If you don't want this load for this rate, then you don't have to take it. And I think that's like that's from the freight broker side. And I mean, if you were to look at, I guess, which countries have set rates, I mean, they're usually socialist countries. So if we want to take a step back and not be a capitalist society and be more of a socialist society, I think that's going to have a huge negative impact also on the economy. So that's why I'm a proponent of, like, I'm more a proponent of the capitalist society, where it's like, I'm not forcing you to take this load. This is the rate that I have for you. Whatever my rate is, that's between me and my customer. So that's the way I see things.
So you kind of taking it like when you go car shopping. If you buy a car and you agree on the price with the salesperson, and then a week later you drive by the same lot and you see the car for less money, you can't be mad because you agreed at that rate that you took it at. Is pretty much what I'm gathering.
The car dealership is making a cut, but I'm not asking that car dealership how much he paid for that car or what is this cut. I mean, I just understand that that's part of the flow, and it's like there's so many middlemen in the world that like you don't ask them how much they paid is because that how much they paid is really doesn't really matter. It's how much will you get that for.
So another question from Ed Hoschild. How much of the fuel surcharge are you keeping?
It's an interesting question because I don't know how to answer that question because I typically never pay a carrier fuel surcharge unless they ask me for, and so I actually really can't answer that question because I typically what I would pay the carrier would be a flat rate that we negotiated, and the fuel surcharge is how much the customer would give us on top of the load. So sometimes like only large shippers typically do fuel surcharges. So for example, the fuel surcharge, I mean it's just in my load it's tough to say. It's tough for me to like describe it, but I don't know, like sometimes the fuel surcharge would be the only money I'd have in a load. Let's say if I made $50 in a load, the fuel surcharge might be $50 and that was my profit. So it's difficult for me to explain how much I give away. It's actually it's not like something that like it's not a question I can answer because I think it's just kind of complicated.
Our next question is from Jordan Swanson. How do you think it's okay to pay me a different rate than what's stated on my rate con that you provided just because you decided to change the rate after I picked up the load?
So I don't have the full story here. So that seems kind of like a legal question. For the most part, you're legally not really allowed to do that unless there's legal reasons for it, which could be underlined in a rate confirmation. So the only way that actually would I guess be legal would be if like let's say on the rate confirmation it says $100 late fee, or $100 for not approving tracking updates via your phone or etc. I guess it's the only legal way to cut a rate. But overall, if both parties signed it, then legally they can't do anything.
This must be referring to like one of the ones I've seen when I've been in the truck on a load where it's like, oh, you got to check in at this time every day, and it's written in the very small print, and then nobody's reminding you, and then if you don't, they just docking you for each day you didn't do it, and then you deliver the load, and you owe them more than what you got for the load.
That's awful. I've never done it before in my life. I would never do that.
No, hey, and just to be clear, I know that these questions aren't all directed in your particular direction, but I do appreciate you coming on to review from your infinite wisdom on this topic.
Totally. I'm excited to be here.
Stephanie McBurney said, why can you not gather all the pertinent information from the shipper regarding the load? Why must we waste our time tracking down phone numbers and contact personnel and correct addresses and complete PO numbers?
I think this boils down to people being lazy and not having time. So that does happen. It's typically because someone didn't do their work at a freight brokerage, and it's that's frustrating. That's for sure frustrating, and that's in the freight broker to do. So
fair enough. All right, and so Damsel in a Diesel asked, why do you need the temp updates when I could just lie to you and tell you it's great, but my reefer is currently shutting down? Which that broker who had previously responded said, your company should be asking that. A broker should tell you what to preset it to. And Damsel in Diesel responded with, no shit. I'm talking about how they have to call you every day or more to confirm the temperature. So can you talk about constantly calling drivers about temperature updates versus calling the company?
I think for the most part, freight brokers are trained to first call the driver because the driver typically has better information and is most likely less to lie, or at least less likely to lie in the spot. Whereas dispatchers, I think they will just kind of make something up to get the driver or to get the broker off the call. That's one thing. So the first thing is you always call the driver first. If the driver doesn't pick up, then call the dispatcher. That's how I got trained, at least. Second thing is when you're this information gets logged into their TMS. So let's say the driver says the temperature is at 32 degrees, then the broker types in a keyboard, driver says temperature is 32 degrees. That gets logged through their TMS, and that could be legally used. Let's just say if there was a court case, or if there was any issues, that could be used as proof that the broker's not liable for that product. The driver says it was good. If the driver lied to that point, then that would have to be proven in court, for example, or whatever. When that happens, it's all about limiting your liability when it comes to loads. And freight brokers have been taught to make sure that their carriers are compliant with the FMCSA, making sure that any tracking information gets logged. Therefore, if there were any issues, they have that information logged, and they did their due diligence, and they're on top of things. So that's essentially what it is.
Okay, and I think this question might have a very similar answer, kind of along the same lines. But the next question was from Mark Kojak Manson, said, brokers are becoming the telemarketers of the trucking industry. If they're not bothering the driver, they're bothering the DP, which makes the DP bother you. Is that kind of along the lines of like people just trying to CYA, and that's why they're constantly talking to the calling the driver all the time?
Yeah, I mean, there's some brokers that are better, I guess, than others when it comes to contacting dispatchers and drivers. But overall, customers get antsy, and what I've been always taught beforehand is that you want to have information ready for the customer if the customer requests an update. So that's why some brokers have kind of let's say every hour or every 2 hours they update this load and they call the driver, and it gets annoying. They usually just have that so their system's updated, and so that they could update the customer before the customer requests an update. So it all boils down to customer service, and at the end of the day, the shipper's paying the broker. So the broker tends to go far and beyond for the shipper, whereas since the broker is paying the trucking company, they tend to treat the trucking company kind of like shit. And to be honest, a lot of shippers treat brokers like shit too. So it kind of it's like that, unfortunately, just because of the competitiveness in the industry.
So it kind of just rolls downhill and lands on the driver because of that.
Yeah.
So, that brings us to our next one, which again came from Mark Manson when his reply was, if you don't talk to me when you booked the load, then why do you need to contact me instead of the person that you booked the load with? And I'm assuming that the answer is pretty similar to the one that you had before, but I can relate to this one because it seems kind of redundant to call me every 2 hours. We got trailer tracking, we got all this other stuff. You have dispatch.
Yeah. So, some brokerages operate on a cradle to the grave operation where it's a one person running the whole show, or one person has the customer, and that person does the posting. He books the load, and then he tracks it, and then he gets the POD, and then he invoices the customer. Those operations, there are some large brokerages that operate that way. For the most part, you typically have it kind of like assembly line, where you have someone booking a load, and then you have someone tracking the load, and then you have someone giving a POD. So it depends on the operation a brokerage has. And if you know anything from, I guess, Mr. Ford, who created the assembly line for the Ford cars, is the reason why he was able to decrease the price of a car back in the early 1900s or 20th century, was because of the assembly line. So assembly lines tend to be a little bit more efficient, and when you're scaling a company, it tends to be, I guess, kind of like the cheaper solution. So I guess it's just what kind of business are you running? Are you going to run an assembly line, we're going to run a cradle to grave operation. So that's the reason for it.
Right on. So next, Mr. Moose asked, my wife, well, it's not really a question. It's more of a statement, which I'll follow up with a question. He said, my wife was a broker for about a year. I told her I couldn't love her quite as much. So my question is, does it ever affect you personally when people find out that you were a broker?
I talked to a lot of truckers in the industry, and I talked to dispatchers. So it really depends. And I went hitchhiking with a truck driver last month from Menor, Ohio, up in Cleveland to Chicago. We're actually going to have a YouTube video out in the next couple weeks on the FreightCaviar YouTube channel. But so honestly, I think it creates an interesting discussion. I feel like just even like talking now, we could learn from each other. And at the end of the day, I feel like there's a lot of improvements to be made in this industry, and there needs to be more, I guess, how to call it, like more. I can't find the word for it, but essentially, the more technology in this industry that will allow brokers and truck drivers and dispatchers to have a more transparent relationship. This is not talking about like rates transparency, but just like being transparent on other factors such as communicating effectively, making sure that all parties are happy, and more of like kind of more empathy shown to each other will create a better industry. And I think, although right now it's tough, I do believe that the industry with technology, with the improvements in technology, we'll see that happen. So I hope that like these conversations, typically when I talk to, I don't know, dispatchers and truck drivers, usually we just learn from each other and we would have good conversations. And obviously having the FreightCaviar channel has helped me, I guess, in a different light. Usually people are willing to talk to me and they like talking about the industry, and I could share my viewpoints. So overall, I never really had like a negative, I guess, reaction to it. If anything, it's a place for dialogue and to see how we can make improvements.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So our next comment is from Billy Big Rigger. For everyone asking about being called, I talked to a load manager for TQL at the bar one night. He actually gets paid per phone call to get updates. It's kind of a statement, but what's your understanding? I mean, do they get paid per phone call to get updates in any situations?
Every freight brokerage is different. Every pay structure and commission structure is different. So it's really not that easy to tell how someone at TQL. I don't know. I know that like it's definitely possible. Like I wouldn't be surprised to get paid per phone call. That is kind of a very motivating, I guess, motivational booster to get as many phone calls out there. If I was getting paid per phone call, I would make sure to call as many people as I can during the day. So maybe that's why they call so many people nonstop. So I can't verify that information, but it would fit into the TQL model from what I've seen with like a lot of phone calls and especially their pay structure.
Right on. And we've only got two more, and then we can we won't take up too much more of your time.
All good.
So Billy Big Rigger also said, I think the load should be completely transparent. It should have stated on the rate-con exactly what it pays, what the broker is making. I do not begrudge anyone for making money, but I have pulled a few loads in the last weeks for customers I go to often. The rates haven't changed on their end, and I was able to call the broker and get the right rate to haul it. So what about that situation where it essentially sounds like he had a relationship with a shipper, but had gone through a broker, and the broker was changing the rates, but the shipper hadn't changed the rates at all?
Well, everyone has their own business, and they choose to operate in a different light. It's difficult. Like this goes back to the whole transparency on rates, and it's like, people don't go to the supermarket and demand the supermarket to tell them how much they pay for that product. And when you look, there's so many middlemen. It's everyone kind of chooses. They have their own the freedom to choose what pay they want to have. And just like the driver did the right thing of going to the shipper and saying, that the rate didn't change. And I think overall, like, that's probably the best thing to do is to get educated on the industry and find a way to go directly to the shipper to build a relationship with the shipper. Although getting paid is a little bit more complicated from a shipper compared to a freight broker, especially if you got a factoring company. I'm pretty sure a lot of factoring companies don't pay from a shipper; they pay only if it's done through a freight broker. So I think overall, it's I would, if I were a truck driver, I would try to build relationships with shippers and customers, direct customers, and I wouldn't demand brokers to show what they're getting paid, just because no middleman is really showing how much they're getting paid. It's dude, and I mean that's my point of view. I don't think it would actually change anything, because at the end of the day, like, okay, this is how much you're getting paid, but how much am I paying? How much is a broker paying to his employees? How many people does he have staff? How many payrolls does he have to do? How many factoring companies does he have to pay that month? So there's so much more that goes into that rate than just that load. There's a whole business operation to fund, and any business owner understands that running a business, cash is oxygen. So making that transparent really won't change anything, because at the end of the day, it's still going to be. It won't increase your rate.
So our final comment from one of our users was Michael D. Lorenzo. Do you really understand what it is drivers actually do? And do you think it's worth the percentages you take off the top from each load for a pen and paperwork versus what we as drivers do? That's what he wanted to ask.
So I would say that, a freight broker makes on average, and this is what I said earlier, makes around 15%. So if you look at a 1,000-hour load, if the shipper's paying $1,000, on average, $150 will go to the freight broker, and that freight broker will have to make sure that load is covered. He's going to make sure to track that load and update the customer. He's going to make sure to get the POD and then invoice the customer. He's going to make sure to pay the driver afterwards. And overall, I think that's definitely worth the $150 for all that work that goes into doing one load, especially when you're talking about making sure that employees get paid, making sure that there's enough money to go around. So, and when people say, like, for all that you do, I mean, it's being a truck driver is definitely, I would say, it's more difficult, but no one's, I guess, like, if someone really thinks of being a freight broker is easy work, then I think the best thing to do is to try to be a freight broker, because you kind of realize, like, it's not that easy, and it's a lot of stress, and you're dealing with a lot of BS day in and day out. And that's
so like being a truck driver and being stuck on the road and not getting home every day.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I would never be able to be a truck driver for a long. Like, I wouldn't mind being a truck driver for like a month or two just to kind of really feel for it. Like, I know I wouldn't be able to do it, and I think anyone that is a truck driver deserves the most respect for what they do, because it is a tough job, no doubt about it. I sat next to a truck driver last month going from Ohio to Chicago, and I realized, like, it's a lonely job, it's a difficult job, and I think there has to be more respect shown, but I think both,
just not more money.
Not even about more. I think some truck drivers still make good money, and I think the ones that differentiate themselves are probably they're probably educating themselves more from the broker perspective. They're trying to figure out why is that broker making money, and how could they make more money? And I think there's so many tools online to where truck drivers could make more money by potentially reaching out to the customers, by building really good relationships with brokers, by not really relying on DET and load boards, by relying on contract rates, especially right now. It's better. So I think at the end of the day, like when you look at, like for me, when I was a freight broker, I always wanted to learn how to make more money as a freight broker. And so I would go online. I would read about it. I would listen to podcasts. I would try to learn. I wouldn't go after someone and be like, why is this freight broker making more money than me? I'll be like, how can I make money like this freight broker? So I think if you're disappointed with the way you're getting paid, you should figure out a way to make more money, because there's definitely a way for you to make more money instead of complaining on the freight broker for making more money. Because if that freight broker was making money, you could also be making that money. So that's the way I see it.
No, hey, Paul, I appreciate you taking the time to come out here and discuss these questions, because these are questions when I drove, and these drivers, they've been wanting answers. And, I do agree with you that, there's always two sides to this, but also I agree that there needs to be a little bit more transparency and understanding of each person's roles within the industry.
Sure.
It's not easy being the broker, just like it's not easy being the driver. But I'm still leaning with, I think that 15% on the brokerage side, should share some of the pain that we as drivers are experiencing out there right now. Because yes, you get your 15%, and when the rates plummet, that 15% as an average, let's just use 15% as an average, gets carried on. But then the carriers that are booking these loads, not necessarily just owner operators, there's carriers involved. They don't work for free. They're running a business. And then the owner operators running within those carriers have to eat that. So now you got two people essentially shaving off 15%, which is about the same that most carriers are taking off the top. Some are even up to 20 or more.
And then more if you use factoring.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the carriers are using factoring. So, I mean, it seems like it keeps getting chopped and chopped and chopped until it gets to the owner operator who's only got one or two trucks and just trying to make ends meet. Rising fuel costs, rising insurance costs. And here, all they want is transparency. If I was going to say there's any takeaway from what I've heard from some of these answers, it's there should be transparency on both sides. And if their standard is 15%, then put it out there. I'm not saying put it out there for every broker to see, but put it out there for the driver that's accepting the load to see. If I was a broker, I'd want that transparency, because then they're going to come back to me.
I totally understand that, and it's something that I thought about when I had a freight brokerage. I was like, should I be transparent about the rates? Because I was like, that might be a good way to stand out. But I actually was sick and tired of I was a freight broker. I had two brokerages, and honestly, I was like, I don't like this. I don't like this job. I think it's tough. It's tough, especially when you're new, and it's always going to be tough, because the only way to be competitive in the industry is either you're not really making any money, and you're super nice to the drivers, or I guess you're making money and you're not being that nice. So it's like it's bad either way.
So essentially what you're telling me is if the broker's making money, the driver's losing money, and if the driver's making money, then the broker's working to break even. So I mean, it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
In this market, and especially when you're trying to get a new shipper, and it's obviously not always like that, and it depends. I mean, I didn't succeed as a freight broker on my own. I've only worked for I've had my own brokerage, and it didn't work out for me, and I didn't honestly. I left, and I was like I don't want to be a freight broker anymore. So I got burnt out of the industry, and I think that there's what I do want to say overall is that it's a huge industry. As we all know, this industry is massive. everything that
Yeah.
that we have has been shipped. And it's like so many people either want to be a broker, or they want to be a driver, or they want to be a dispatcher. And those fields technically are, there's a lot of people in those fields. And the more people there are, the less money people make. Because as we all know, like, it's supply and demand. If there's only a few handful of drivers, then the market will always be hot, and every driver that would be in the market would be making a lot of money. So if I were looking and trying to be in the industry right now, I would look into other avenues of, either people are making money by just educating truck drivers. People are making money being media companies such as us. I'm on the freight broker side. I have a few sponsors, and I provide content for the freight broker industry. I kind of I want to look outside of the box. So I feel like there's ways to make money in a more enjoyable way in this industry. And the more you get caught up in an industry or in part of the industry where there's a lot of people, the more stress you're going to incur, and the more, cycles you're going to experience, because there's either a hot market or there's a soft market. But I think that if someone wants to be in the industry but they don't want to deal with all the BS of being in the industry, I would kind of look outside of the box and say, how can I fit in here without having to deal with all of the BS? And the only way this market's going to get better for truckers is if truck drivers leave, because then all of a sudden there's going to be a shortage again, and rates will go up. And then once the rates go up, everyone wants to go in because they see everyone's making money, and then it's another cycle. And it's something that has been continuously repeating itself since, I think the beginning of the trucking industry.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong there. And Paul, I appreciate you being a good sport, answering these questions
Totally.
with your time in the industry. And I know some of them were some curveballs for you, but you took them like a champ. So I appreciate everything that you do coming on and clarifying some of these for these drivers that had some questions that they just wanted answers.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think these conversations are important for all parties.
If someone wanted to get a hold of you, Paul, where would they be able to reach out to you at?
The best way is to follow me on my social media accounts, FreightCaviar on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. And then if you wanted to just email me personally, you could email me at PBJ, so like peanut butter jelly, PBJ at FreightCaviar.com.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on Cents Per Mile, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
So that was an exciting conversation. I mean, there was a couple soft jabs in there coming from my perspective, because I heard a lot of things, Paul, that I truly just...
Transparency is socialism. Transparency is socialism. If you love America and you love the way we do things, you don't want transparency, because transparency is socialism.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm super appreciative that he came on, but that was the one answer that made me go like...
Charles came in kind of hot at the end, looking like a... can you guys see that nice little? That's you, Charles, like 5 times.
For those listening, if you can't see it, it's definitely kind of a like 18th century drawing of a firing squad.
Yeah, all right. So I've been in the truck. I grew up in this industry. So when someone tells me that transparency, if you don't like it, get out, find somewhere else to go. Or if you don't like what you're doing, then take a different job, come work as a broker. I'm like, no, I kind of enjoyed driving the truck. If I wanted to be a broker, I'd clock in and lose a little bit of my soul every day, taking money out of the driver's pockets. But I didn't. I got in the truck, and I really have a problem wrestling with the fact that this is the solution. Is there is no solution. And Paul's the nicest broker you'll find. So if this is the answers we're getting from him, then imagine what you're going to get from some of the guys out there.
Well, and the other thing too is and I don't know if it's apples and oranges because I've never been a broker. I've been in a truck and all that kind of stuff. But like, he kept talking about how there's middlemen and there's no transparency. But like, when you sell or buy a house, you know exactly how much commission like your real estate agent is getting.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really apples and oranges, but it's kind of one of those things. There's lots of things where you pay, you can see commissions built into it. And I mean, I would say that the broker's cut isn't that much different than that.
I would agree with you. And again, in the order of transparency and with the way that the industry is going, yes, I understand there's going to be times you're up, there's times you're down. But is it so hard to put it on the sheet so the person, we're not asking you to post it on Google where every other broker can see what rates you're getting and come in there and undercut you. We're saying post it to the truck that's accepting the load. Let them see. Let them have transparency to know, like, is this feasible? Obviously, if the broker is making more money than the driver and he gets to be home every night, but I get to be gone all week and trying to make ends meet, obviously, I'm not going to take that load. But if I don't know, and I'm that nice driver that, hey, listen, I'm good with it right now, but is that right? I personally don't think it is. Like, if I was that broker and I'm like, hey, yeah, I just made all this money, fuel costs going up. I just picture Mr. Burns over there sitting like, yeah. I just don't see it being something that I could go to sleep at night saying, hey, you're broke, I made my money, or I'm broke, you made your money. There's got to be a common ground in the middle.
And I think it's also, you said a lot about Paul being, one of the nicest brokers out there. Super nice dude, seems legit, even got out of the brokerage because he didn't want to be part of the rat race anymore, right? But his answer to the fuel surcharge question also blew my mind.
You mean the non-answer?
Well, but then eventually he said, sometimes that's my only profit. Like, that is just like, are you serious right now? Are you serious?
Taking the driver's side on this one. If that's your only profit, imagine being me, the driver, and the fuel costs going up, and I'm not even getting the entire fuel surcharge.
Yeah, because at that point, if the driver isn't even getting the fuel charge, like the whole point of that is like you're getting lubed up and bent over for fuel prices right now. That's what's supposed to offset that. But
instead, it's going to the brokers so they can make their money. No, I'm with you 100% on this one, and I honestly, there was a lot of this that I felt I knew, but never got confirmed, and then there were some of these things that I'm like, oh wow,
yep,
like wow.
So I guess in summation, really, my only thing is, the FMCSA, which is a whole nother conversation, but they're supposed to start revisiting broker transparency again in early 2023. Does that mean we're moving in a socialist direction if they want transparency?
Oh my God. All right, gentlemen, I know you could talk all day on this subject, but I think that's our episode today.
I guess Josh is calling it. So at that point, I just want to remind everybody, if you get a second, wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching, just make sure to like, subscribe, rate, etc. It will, once again, help us start to do cooler stuff on this podcast. Got some crazy stuff coming up. We have moved to bi-weekly. I don't know if you were paying enough attention to catch that. But yeah, so if you just do all those things, it'll help us out a lot. Stay safe out there, and if you have any questions about brokers or you have anything to say, sound off in the comments.
Thank you for tuning in Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracey.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson, and we'll catch you next time.